The moment I saw my golden boy brother's face turn white as our grandmother's lawyer read, Sarah Mitchell inherits $800,000, I knew something was terribly wrong. But I never imagined that envelope in my shaking hands contained proof he'd been stealing from Grandma Eleanor and a family secret that would shatter everything I believed about who I am. I'm Sarah. I'm 35, and 3 months ago, I thought I was just the forgotten daughter in a family that worshipped my lawyer brother Jake. Today, Jake is in federal prison, and I'm about to tell you exactly how a sweet grandmother's final gift exposed a criminal who targeted 12 families just like ours. Here's what you need to know. If you've ever felt invisible next to a golden child sibling, if you're caring for aging parents, or if something feels off about your family dynamics, this story could save you from financial devastation and years of manipulation. I have the recordings, the bank statements, and the adoption papers that prove every word. But first, let me tell you about the day I discovered I wasn't supposed to exist in this family at all. Working nights in the ICU teaches you to spot when someone's hiding something. The way families whisper in hospital corridors, how they avoid eye contact when discussing what's best for mom. These are the same red flags that surrounded every family gathering, and for decades, the signs went completely over my head. My colleagues know me as the nurse who stays late to hold a dying patient's hand, who remembers every grandchild's name, who fights insurance companies to get families the care they deserve. What they don't realize is that while becoming an expert at protecting other people's families, my own was systematically destroying itself from the inside. This story contains court documents that are now public record, medical files that exposed the truth about Grandma Eleanor's final months, and recordings that will make you question everything you believe about family loyalty. But more importantly, it contains warning signs that could protect your elderly relatives from financial predators who specifically target families like yours. Families where guilt, secrets, and manipulation have been mistaken for love for generations. The Mitchell family Christmas of 2022 perfectly captured 30 years of subtle cruelty disguised as tradition. Jake unwrapped a brand new MacBook Pro, keys to a BMW lease, and an envelope containing $5,000 cash for his hard work this year. My gifts sat in a neat pile: scrubs from Target, a generic gift card, and practical items that screamed, "We see you as the helper, not the achiever." When Mom noticed my expression, her response was the same phrase that had haunted every celebration since childhood. "Sarah, sweetheart, you should be grateful for what you have." The words stung worse than any slap. But what devastated me was Dad's immediate nod of agreement, as if my hurt feelings were somehow ungrateful and inappropriate. That phrase, "grateful for what you have," became the family motto whenever anyone questioned the obvious disparity. Grateful when Jake's student loans disappeared while mine accumulated interest. Grateful when his accomplishments dominated every dinner conversation while my life-saving work earned polite smiles. Grateful when family financial discussions happened behind closed doors because, as Dad explained, these matters don't really concern you, honey. The professional contrast was perhaps the most painful aspect of this dynamic. Jake's corporate law career was treated like he was personally saving the American economy, complete with detailed updates about mergers, acquisitions, and billable hours that supposedly mattered to society. Meanwhile, my work in the ICU, literally holding people's hands as they died, performing CPR on teenagers, helping families navigate the worst moments of their lives, was dismissed as Sarah's little job at the hospital. During Jake's promotion celebration last spring, Dad stood to deliver a toast about how proud he was of his son who would carry on the family legacy of success. That same week, emergency room physicians had called me to the ICU for a consultation that saved a 73-year-old grandfather's life, giving his family 6 more months together before his peaceful passing. When the story came up at dinner, Mom actually changed the subject to Jake's latest client acquisition. Family gatherings became performances where everyone played their assigned roles. Jake held court, discussing important matters with Dad, while Mom hung on every word. The women, myself included, were expected to serve, clean, and provide supportive audience participation for the men's conversations. Questions about my work received one-word responses, while Jake's stories about corporate politics earned follow-up questions and animated discussions. But the most insidious part wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't say. No one ever asked about my patients, my continuing education, or my professional goals. When nursing friends called during family dinners, Mom would answer with, "Sarah's busy with family right now," as if my career relationships were interruptions rather than important connections. The message was crystal clear. Jake's professional network mattered. Mine was just socializing. Financial discussions revealed the deepest level of exclusion. Family decisions about investments, property, and long-term planning happened in hushed conversations that stopped whenever other family members approached. "Don't worry about these boring details," Dad would say, patting my shoulder like a child being dismissed from adult conversations. Meanwhile, Jake received detailed explanations about every financial decision, as if he were being groomed for eventual family leadership. The psychological impact was devastating and cumulative. Years of being treated as the family afterthought created a constant internal questioning. Was there something wrong with me? Did my work not matter? Was Jake simply more valuable as a person? The doubt became so pervasive that even professional successes felt hollow, because the people whose opinions mattered most consistently demonstrated that my achievements were footnotes in the family story. What made everything worse was the subtlety of it all. There were no dramatic confrontations, no obvious cruelty that could be called out or addressed. Instead, there was a steady drip of dismissal, exclusion, and minimization that was always dressed up as family normalcy. When friends noticed the dynamic and expressed concern, it was easy to rationalize. Every family has its quirks. Parents have different relationships with different children. Jake was just the naturally ambitious one. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult shift last fall. After losing a patient despite everything our team could do, the emotional exhaustion was overwhelming. Driving home, all that was wanted was family comfort, someone to acknowledge that saving lives was meaningful work, that the emotional toll mattered, that the effort was seen and valued. Instead, the family WhatsApp group was buzzing with congratulations for Jake's latest case victory. 23 messages celebrating his success, not one asking about the 12-hour shift that had just ended or the family who had lost their father despite our best efforts. That night, sitting alone in the hospital parking lot, the realization finally hit. This wasn't normal family dynamics. Something else was happening here. Grandma Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning in March, while Jake was visiting her for what had become his weekly ritual. The phone call came during a double shift. Mom's voice strangely flat as she delivered the news. Grandma passed peacefully in her sleep. Jake found her when he went to check on her this morning. Something felt off about the family's behavior at the funeral. While everyone grieved Eleanor's passing, there was an undercurrent of nervous energy that didn't match the solemnity of the occasion. Jake kept checking his phone during the service, whispering urgently with Dad in corners, while Mom's eyes darted between them with an expression that looked more like anxiety than sorrow. The conversation stopped abruptly when anyone else approached. Relatives who tried to share memories of Eleanor were politely redirected to other topics, as if the family had collectively decided that reminiscing was somehow inappropriate. Even the funeral director seemed confused by the rushed timeline and minimal viewing arrangements for a woman who had been so beloved in the community. Jake's confidence about the inheritance was impossible to ignore. During the reception, he made casual comments about finally paying off his student loans and jokes about Grandma always knowing who really understood family legacy. His certainty was so complete that he'd already contacted a realtor about selling Eleanor's Victorian house, discussing renovation costs with Dad as if the property transfer was just a formality. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday at Hartwell & Associates, coincidentally, Jake's own law firm. Convenient, right? He said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We can handle everything in-house, keep it simple for the family. But as the family gathered in that familiar conference room, surrounded by Jake's colleagues and the legal documents that would supposedly confirm everything we'd assumed about Eleanor's final wishes, none of us were prepared for what was about to unfold. The envelope that would change everything was sitting on the table, waiting to reveal secrets that had been carefully hidden for decades. The conference room at Hartwell & Associates felt suffocating as the lawyer cleared his throat and began reading Eleanor's will. Jake sat forward in his chair, practically vibrating with anticipation, while Mom and Dad exchanged the kind of meaningful glances that suggested they knew exactly what was coming. "To my beloved granddaughter Sarah Mitchell," the lawyer's voice cut through the silence, "I leave my home at 1847 Elm Street, along with all its contents and the sum of $800,000 from my investment portfolio." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face drained of all color, as if someone had physically struck him. Dad's mouth fell open, while Mom gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. The shock was so complete that for a moment, nobody seemed to remember how to breathe. "To my grandson, Jake Mitchell," the lawyer continued, his voice steady despite the chaos he was unleashing, "I leave the sum of $50,000 to be held in trust and released only upon completion of court-mandated financial counseling and a comprehensive psychological evaluation." Jake exploded from his chair with such force that it toppled backward. "This is impossible," he snarled, his professional composure completely shattered. "Grandma promised me that house. We discussed it just last month. She was confused. She didn't understand what she was signing. This will is fraudulent." But the lawyer held up a weathered hand, his expression grave. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell was examined by 2 independent physicians 6 months ago and declared mentally competent. The will was executed in the presence of 3 witnesses, none of whom are family members. Additionally, she left sealed letters for each of you, with specific instructions that they be opened privately. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as trembling fingers broke Eleanor's familiar wax seal. Her handwriting, still elegant despite her age, filled the cream-colored pages with words that would rewrite everything about family identity and belonging. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then it's time for you to learn the truth that we've kept from you since you were 6 months old. You were adopted, sweetheart. After your birth parents, my dear friends Michael and Susan Chen died in a terrible car accident." The words blurred as tears filled burning eyes. Adopted? That was impossible. Everyone always commented on the resemblance to Mom, the same laugh, the same mannerisms. How could this fundamental truth about identity have been hidden for 35 years? Your birth parents were both teachers, kindergarten and high school English. They were the most loving, compassionate people I've ever known, and every day you honor their memory through your work caring for others. Your gift with patience isn't coincidence, darling. It's in your DNA. But the letter's next paragraph contained a warning that made blood run cold. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Jake has been stealing from me, and I fear this is only the beginning of what you'll discover." Eleanor's letter included a small brass key and precise instructions. Safety deposit box 247 at First National Bank. Go alone, trust no one in the family until you understand what we're truly dealing with. Document everything you find. The next morning brought a called-in sick day and a drive downtown with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside Box 247 lay a collection that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. Bank statements, legal documents, and a thick folder labeled Jake's Criminal Activities, evidence collected by private investigator Marcus Thompson. The financial records painted a devastating picture of systematic theft spanning 8 months. Jake had been using his power of attorney, supposedly granted to help Eleanor manage her bills, to transfer money from her accounts into his own. The amounts started small, $500 here, $1,000 there, carefully designed to avoid immediate detection by an elderly woman who trusted her grandson completely. But the theft had escalated dramatically in Eleanor's final weeks. Bank statements showed transfers of $47,000 in the month before her death, payments flowing directly to Jake's credit cards, car loan, and mortgage company. Eleanor's own grandmother had become Jake's personal ATM, funding his lifestyle while she worried about affording her medication. Marcus Thompson's private investigator report revealed a scope of criminality that extended far beyond Eleanor's victimization. Jake wasn't operating alone. He was part of a sophisticated network at Hartwell & Associates that specifically targeted elderly clients with complicated family dynamics. The law firm's elder care division was actually a predatory operation designed to identify and exploit vulnerable seniors. The investigation had uncovered 12 other families across 3 states, each sharing a disturbing pattern: elderly relatives with adoptive children, blended families, or estranged relationships. Jake and his colleagues would exploit existing family tensions to gain financial control, then systematically drain accounts while the families were too busy fighting each other to notice the theft. The Henderson case file made for particularly heartbreaking reading. 78-year-old Margaret Henderson had died alone in a state nursing facility because her care fund had been emptied by Jake's operation. Her adopted daughter, Michelle, couldn't afford private care and blamed herself for being unable to provide better support. Meanwhile, Jake had used Margaret's money to make payments on his BMW. David Rodriguez's story was equally devastating. His grandfather's dementia care fund had been drained while Jake convinced the family that David was manipulating the elderly man for inheritance money. The family ostracized David based on Jake's lies, and the grandfather ended up in a substandard state facility while his stolen money funded Jake's luxury apartment. But the most chilling discovery was how the operation specifically targeted adoptive families. Jake and his associates used public adoption records to identify vulnerable family structures, then exploited the unique guilt and insecurity that many adoptive parents carry. They convinced loving parents that their adoptive children wouldn't understand family loyalty the way biological children would. The bottom of the safety deposit box contained a recording device and Eleanor's final note: "Play this last, sweetheart. You need to hear how your family has been manipulated." The recording captured a conversation in Eleanor's living room from 3 months before her death. Jake's voice was cold and calculating as he spoke to Mom and Dad. The adoption angle works every time. Adoptive parents are so terrified their kids will abandon them that they'll do anything to keep the secret. Sarah doesn't know, and she never will, as long as you keep excluding her from family business. Mom's tearful voice protested, "Jake, this isn't right. Sarah deserves to know about her birth parents. She deserves to be treated equally in this family." Jake's laughter was cruel and dismissive. "Mom, she's not really family. You know it, Dad knows it, and deep down, you're grateful for the biological son who actually matters. Sarah will be fine with her little nursing job, but the real family assets need to stay with real family members." Dad's weak agreement was perhaps the most painful part. He's right, Linda. We have to think about Jake's future, about the grandchildren he'll give us. Sarah has her career. The recording revealed the systematic manipulation that had poisoned 35 years of family relationships, but Eleanor's voice suddenly cut through Jake's monologue with devastating clarity. "Is that really what you think, Jake? Because I've been recording our conversations for months." Eleanor's evidence led directly to Marcus Thompson, the private investigator whose phone number was tucked inside the folder. His relief was palpable when the call finally came. "Your grandmother was the bravest client I've ever worked with. She knew exposing Jake would devastate your family, but she also understood that staying silent would let him destroy countless others." The coffee shop meeting revealed the staggering scope of what Eleanor had uncovered. Marcus spread files across the table like a prosecutor preparing for trial, each folder representing another family torn apart by Jake's operation. "This isn't just theft," he explained, his voice grim. "It's psychological warfare designed to exploit the deepest vulnerabilities in family structures." Hartwell and Associates had created what Marcus called the perfect hunting ground for financial predators. The firm's elder law division attracted families during their most vulnerable moments, dealing with aging parents, estate planning, and end-of-life decisions. Instead of providing legal protection, Jake and 4 other attorneys were systematically identifying and exploiting their clients' emotional weak points. The operation generated an estimated $2.8 million in stolen assets over 3 years, with senior partners at the firm taking percentages in exchange for covering up complaints and discrediting victims who tried to seek justice. When families started asking questions about missing money, the firm would claim confusion, forgetfulness, or suggest that the elderly clients had made poor financial decisions independently. Reaching out to the other victim families revealed the devastating human cost behind those statistics. Michelle Henderson's voice broke during the phone call. "I thought Mom hated me. She left everything to Jake's client management fund, but when she died, there was nothing. I couldn't even afford a proper funeral. I've spent 2 years blaming myself for somehow failing her." The systematic destruction of family relationships was perhaps more cruel than the financial theft itself. David Rodriguez hadn't spoken to his grandfather in over a year because Jake had convinced the family that David was exploiting the old man's dementia for inheritance money. "My own cousins won't return my calls," David said, his pain evident even over the phone. "They think I'm some kind of predator when all I wanted was to make sure Grandpa got proper care." Each victim's story followed the same heartbreaking pattern. Families manipulated into destroying themselves while Jake and his associates looted everything of value. The psychological damage often exceeded the financial losses, with relationships severed, trust destroyed, and elderly relatives dying alone because their families had been turned against each other. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was how the operation specifically weaponized adoption-related shame and insecurity. Jake's training materials found in Marcus's investigation included detailed instructions on exploiting adoptive families. Adoptive parents live in constant fear of abandonment, suggest that adoptive children have different loyalties, different values, different connections to family legacy. The parents will exclude them from financial decisions to protect the family unity. The realization struck like a physical blow. Every family gathering, every exclusion, every dismissive comment about being grateful for what you have had been orchestrated by Jake's manipulation of Mom and Dad's deepest fears. Their treatment wasn't just favoritism, it was the result of systematic psychological manipulation designed to isolate and exclude while Jake positioned himself as the family's financial savior. Jake's phone call came within 48 hours of the initial complaint being filed with the State Bar Association. His voice carried a cold menace that was completely foreign. "You have no idea what you're messing with, Sarah. Walk away now, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The threat was reported immediately, leading to a restraining order and the beginning of what would become a federal investigation into financial elder abuse. But Jake's desperation suggested something even more dangerous was coming: the cornered predator's final, most vicious attack. Jennifer Walsh's elder abuse law practice had seen countless cases of financial exploitation, but Eleanor's meticulously documented evidence left the veteran attorney speechless. "Your grandmother essentially built our entire case for us," Jennifer said, carefully reviewing each bank statement and recording. "This level of documentation is unprecedented. It's like she knew exactly what prosecutors would need to ensure conviction." The legal strategy required assembling a team of experts who could translate Jake's sophisticated crimes into language that juries would understand. Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist, reviewed Eleanor's medical records and confirmed her mental competency throughout the theft period. Mrs. Mitchell showed no cognitive impairment that would affect her decision-making, Dr. Williams testified. Her documentation demonstrates clear, logical thinking and remarkable attention to detail. Forensic accountant Robert Chen traced every stolen dollar through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts that Jake had established to hide his crimes. "This wasn't impulsive theft," Chen explained during his deposition. "This was a premeditated, sophisticated enterprise designed to avoid detection while maximizing extraction of assets from vulnerable elderly clients." But the most powerful testimonies came from the families themselves. Michelle Henderson, David Rodriguez, and 8 other victims spoke about the psychological manipulation they'd endured, the relationships that had been destroyed, and the ongoing trauma of discovering they'd been systematically deceived by trusted professionals. "Jake didn't just steal my mother's money," Michelle testified, her voice steady despite her tears. "He stole 2 years of time I could have spent with her because I believed his lies about my motivations. I'll never get to tell her I loved her, not her money. That opportunity is gone forever." As the evidence mounted, something unexpected happened within Hartwell and Associates. Senior partners who had been profiting from Jake's operation began cooperating with federal investigators, providing additional evidence in exchange for reduced charges. The conspiracy was unraveling from within as everyone scrambled to save themselves. Jake's colleagues revealed training materials that showed the systematic nature of the elder abuse operation. Internal emails discussed maximizing extraction from emotional manipulation scenarios and leveraging family guilt for sustained access to assets. The firm had essentially industrialized the exploitation of vulnerable families. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, Maria Santos, had built her career on protecting elderly victims from financial predators. "This case represents one of the most sophisticated and cruel elder abuse operations we've ever encountered," she announced at a press conference. "The defendants didn't just steal money, they weaponized family love to destroy the very relationships that should have protected these vulnerable seniors." But even as the legal machinery ground forward toward justice, Jake was preparing one final, desperate move that would force a choice between protecting family relationships and ensuring that other families would never suffer the same devastating manipulation. The predator was cornered, and cornered predators are always most dangerous in their final moments. 3 months after filing the initial complaints, the time had come to tell Mom and Dad the complete truth about what their golden boy had been doing to their family and countless others. The decision to call a family meeting felt both necessary and terrifying. These were the people who had raised and loved me, even if their love had been manipulated and misdirected for decades. The living room, where we'd celebrated so many of Jake's achievements, now felt like a courtroom as the evidence was carefully laid out on the coffee table. Bank statements showing Eleanor's systematic financial abuse, recordings revealing Jake's cruel manipulation, case files of the 12 other families he'd destroyed. Mom's face crumpled as she recognized her own voice on the recordings, while Dad sat in stunned silence, finally understanding how completely they'd been played. "Mom, Dad, I need you to understand something." The words came carefully, respectfully, despite the years of pain. "What Jake did to you, the way he used your love for me against both of us, that's not your fault. You were trying to protect our family from something you thought would hurt us, but Jake was the one causing the real damage." Dad's voice cracked as he spoke for the first time in an hour. "Sarah, honey, we thought Jake said you'd leave us if you knew about the adoption. He said you'd want to find your real family, and we'd lose you forever. We were so scared." The fear in his eyes was genuine, the regret devastating to witness. The family therapy sessions that followed were some of the most difficult conversations of our lives. Dr. Rebecca Torres, a specialist in family trauma, helped Mom and Dad understand how Jake had exploited their deepest insecurities as adoptive parents. "He weaponized your love," Dr. Torres explained. "He took your natural desire to protect Sarah and turned it into a tool for excluding her." But the real breakthrough came when Mom finally found the courage to speak directly about her guilt. "I always knew something felt wrong about how we treated you differently," she admitted through tears. "But Jake made it seem like protecting the family secret was the same as protecting you. I convinced myself that loving you meant keeping you safe from painful truths." The decision to publicly support the federal prosecution wasn't easy for any of us. Jake was still their son, still my brother, despite everything he'd done. But as we sat in that courtroom, listening to victim after victim describe how his operation had destroyed their families, the choice became clear. Real love meant protecting others from the monster Jake had become. When Jake's sentencing day arrived, Mom and Dad were there, not to support him, but to support the families he'd victimized. Their presence in that courtroom, sitting with the prosecutors rather than the defense, represented the final breaking of Jake's psychological hold over our family. The golden boy who had manipulated us for decades was finally facing consequences for his cruelty. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Jake to 12 years in federal prison for elder abuse, wire fraud, and racketeering conspiracy. The courtroom was packed with victim families who had traveled from 3 states to witness justice, many of them holding hands as the verdict was read. Jake's law license was permanently revoked, and the court ordered him to pay $3.2 million in restitution to the families he'd destroyed. Hartwell and Associates collapsed within 6 months of the investigation's conclusion. Senior partners faced their own criminal charges, while the firm's assets were liquidated to help compensate victims. The building that had housed Jake's operation now sits empty, a monument to how trusted institutions can become predatory enterprises when greed overrides ethics. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual prosecutions. The State Bar Association implemented new oversight procedures for elder law practices, requiring independent monitoring of attorney access to client accounts. Banking regulations were strengthened to flag unusual transfer patterns from elderly accounts, creating safeguards that Eleanor's documentation had proven were desperately needed. Michelle Henderson used her portion of the restitution to create a memorial garden for her mother at the nursing home where Margaret had died alone. Mom would have loved knowing that her suffering helped protect other families, Michelle said at the dedication ceremony. David Rodriguez was able to move his grandfather to a private memory care facility, finally providing the quality care that should have been available all along. But perhaps the most meaningful consequence was the transformation within our own family. Mom and Dad entered ongoing therapy to address the guilt and manipulation that had poisoned our relationships for decades. The healing process wasn't quick or easy, but for the first time in 35 years, family conversations included everyone equally. The golden boy pedestal that had elevated Jake while diminishing everyone else was finally demolished. In its place grew something healthier, a family learning to value each member's contributions, to communicate honestly about difficult topics, and to recognize that real love doesn't require secrets or exclusion. Eleanor would have been proud of what her final gift had ultimately created. Not just justice for the victims, but genuine healing for the family she'd always loved. Eleanor's inheritance became the foundation for the Chen Mitchell Foundation, named to honor both my birth parents and the grandmother who protected me. The organization provides free legal advocacy for adoptive families facing financial exploitation, ensuring that vulnerable families have resources to fight back against predators who weaponize their love. Speaking engagements across the country now fill weekends that once felt empty and purposeless. Sharing this story with other families has revealed how common these manipulation tactics are. Countless women approach after presentations to share their own experiences of being excluded, dismissed, or marginalized within their families through psychological manipulation disguised as protection. The survivor's guilt was unexpected and overwhelming. Why did Eleanor choose to protect me while allowing Jake to destroy other families? Why did it take her death to expose the truth? Therapy helped process these complex emotions, understanding that loving someone doesn't mean approving of all their choices, even when those choices ultimately saved your life. Recent months have brought something precious and unexpected: genuine relationships with my birth parents' former colleagues who remember Michael and Susan Chen. Learning about their teaching methods, their community involvement, and their dreams for their daughter has filled gaps that adoption records couldn't provide. The nursing instincts that always felt natural now make perfect sense. Compassion truly can be inherited. The story continues evolving every day. Families across the country now have Eleanor's warning signs to protect themselves. 3 new elder abuse prosecutions have used our case as a template. Most importantly, love has finally been separated from secrets in our family, creating space for authentic connection to grow.